It's such a pleasure to be here today with you all. I'm going to start by introducing our amazing authors who I'm so excited to hear them talk. And I'm okay. And our first on the list is Diana Butler Bass. Diana, would you come on up as I call your name? Diana's passion is sharing great ideas to change lives and the world, a passion that ranges from informing the public about spiritual trends, challenging conventional narratives about religious practice, entering the fray of social media with spiritual wisdom and smart theology, and writing books to help readers see themselves, their place in history, and God differently. In her writing, she has traced developments in Christianity in the United States, and in her own life, she has written books for congregations and for those who have thought about leaving church behind. In the process, she has helped many people understand what they are experiencing and discover new ways of exploring their spiritual lives. Diana holds a doctorate in religious studies from Duke. She is the author of 11 books, and her most recent is titled Freeing Jesus. She has written extensively in popular media, her bylines appearing in the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, Atlantic, USA Today, and many others. And she has commented on religion, politics, and culture in the media widely in many global news outlets. She and her husband live in Alexandria, Virginia. Please welcome Dr. Diana Butler Bass. Our next speaker is Anjali Enjeti. Anjali, please come on up. Anjali, who earned her bachelor's degree in 1995, is the author of Southbound, Essays on Identity, Inheritance, and Social Change, and The Parted Earth. A one-time attorney, she teaches creative writing in the MFA programs at Antioch University in Los Angeles and Reinhardt University in Waleska, Georgia. Her work has appeared in the Los Angeles Times, the Boston Globe, Harper's Bazaar, and Oxford American, among others. In 2022, Anjali was named Georgia's Author of the Year for her first novel, The Parted Earth, a sweeping work spanning more than half a century and cities from New Delhi to Atlanta. This nonfiction debut is a heartfelt and human portrait of the long shadow of the partition of India on the lives of 3 generations of women. It has been described as tightly plotted, immersive, and, here's my favorite, stunning. Anjali is also a finalist for the 2023 Townsend Prize for Fiction. Please welcome Anjali Enjeti. Candis Watts-Smith. Candis Watts-Smith is a triple threat, earning her bachelor's, master's, and Ph.D., all from Duke, which she joined as an associate professor of political science in 2021. Her research highlights race and ethnicity's role in shaping the American political landscape. In January of this year, her duties expanded when she was appointed on an 18-month term as Interim Vice Provost for Undergraduate Education, and we thank you for that. Her nonfiction catalog continues to grow. In 2014, she published her first book, Black Mosaic, which examines the influence of Black immigrants from Latin America, the Caribbean, and Africa on Black politics in the 21st century. This debut was well received, with one reviewer calling it the essential guide on race, racism, and the BLM movement, fighting for racial justice, fighting against racial injustice, and more. She followed that in 2018 with Black Politics in Transition and Racial Stasis, which interrogates the countervailing forces that hinder racial progress, with a special focus on the role of the millennial generation. Her latest work is Stay Woke, A People's Guide to Making All Black Lives Matter. The book serves as an essential companion for those who are looking for guidance on their anti-racist journey, words for their thoughts, or instruction to help develop a more equitable society. Candis and her family reside on East Campus of Duke University, where she serves as faculty in residence for the Southgate Residence Hall. Please welcome Dr. Candis Watts-Smith. And last but not least, Monica West, a native of Cleveland. Thank you. A native of Cleveland, Ohio, Monica West began writing as a child in elementary school. She received her BA in English Literature from Duke in 1999 and went on to earn her MA from New York University and her MFA from the Iowa Writers Workshop, where she was a Rona Jaffe Graduate Fellow. Her book, Revival Season, is her first novel. The Washington Post described it as spellbinding, noting that Revival Season should be read alongside Alice Walker's The Color Purple. Revival Seasons revolves around the story of the daughter of one of the South's most famous Baptist preachers, who discovers a shocking secret about her father that puts her at odds with both her faith and her family. Monica began her career working in trade and educational publishing in New York, where she participated in writing workshops at the Frederick Douglass Creative Arts Center and at the Sackett Street Writers Workshop. Later, she shifted careers and became a high school English teacher in Baltimore and San Francisco. It was during her time at the Squaw Valley Community of Writers and the Napa Valley's Writers Conference that she thankfully started to take her writing more seriously and never looked back. She lives in Seattle, Washington, and is teaching at the University of San Francisco and writing her next novel. Please welcome Monica West. I would like to start with a couple of questions today for our authors, and I would love for all of you, if you would, to answer the questions we're going to start off with. And then after these few questions, we'll take your questions, because we would love to hear what you would like to ask the panel today. So the first question is the question that, admittedly, authors get at almost every event. And it is, what inspires or what drives you to write? Get us started, Monica? Sure.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for all being here. What inspires me to write is writing feels like a reflex to me, like breathing. So it doesn't feel like something I have to force myself to sit down and do. I feel like when I'm not writing, something feels like it's off. So I'm always thinking through a book or thinking through a sentence or thinking through a passage or a phrase. And so my day doesn't feel like it's complete unless I've written something or thought through something or read something. And I was talking this morning to some of the other writers here about something that feels a little bit, this capitalist machine of you have to write every day. But I don't see it as that kind of production thing. I think of it as just getting the thoughts from my head onto paper. And so that's something that I just have to stay in touch with and stay in touch with my characters and my story arcs. And so that keeps me going. And that is what gets me writing every day or that's what kind of inspires me.
Okay, I don't have an inspiring answer. I write for work. I'm a faculty member. I write all the time. I had to write to get a job. I had to write to get tenure. I had to write, hopefully I'll get promotion one day. I had to write for that. But I'll say this, is that as an academic, there tends to be an orientation toward writing for a very small group of people, using words that nobody understands. Yep. And writing in journals that nobody can afford to buy. Like if you go on Google Scholar and you see, why would you go there anyway? But if you did, it's like the American Journal of Political Science, and then you click on it, there's a paywall. And that's very, in my mind, very elitist. And so I write for work, but I try to write in the style of writing to convey information to more people. I mean, I talk about racism, and I think it's wrong to just write in journals that nobody can access unless you have a university, password or something like that. So, I'm only inspired to write insofar as I can write something that is helpful to somebody else.
This is interesting because each one of these is going to be slightly different, but I think that we are turning around a prism on inspiration, really. I write as a spiritual practice. As a Christian, there's this verse that I can never get away from. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And so that's the approach that I take to writing, is that there is this calling to the word that draws us very close to the heart of meaning and purpose and compassion and love in the universe. And so for me, writing becomes like all kinds of other spiritual practices I engage in my life. Prayer, discernment, reflection, hospitality. And it's just part of a panoply of things that make up who I am as a person. And so I can't stop doing that.
Wow, these answers are really going to be hard for me to follow. So I will say that writing for me starts out as a really selfish act, meaning I'm writing to understand something happening in the world, right? It really is at its most elemental level when I'm in the thinking and the drafting stage. It really is about me saying, I don't understand why this is happening. How do I figure it out? How do I learn more about the issue? How do I understand the ways in which I am complicit in something that I'm trying to understand? So I write fiction. This is a novel. I've written a nonfiction collection of essays, but I'm also a journalist. I'm also a freelance journalist. So when I write, say, an article on a voting rights law that was passed in Georgia a couple years ago, a voting suppression law, and I'm writing about voting rights, I start from the core of how did we get here? How did this happen? Why are we dealing with this law? Who is it affecting? But then as the process gets further along, I then write to sort of educate people about something. People who are also confused and bewildered and grieving over something that is causing them pain. So it starts out is that I'm writing to understand a problem. And then it becomes something where I'm trying to raise awareness about an issue happening in the world.
It's beautiful. These answers. They're about individual experience as well as community experience, right? The writing in itself, the inspiration, the drive to it, the purpose for it is both for the personal and the public. Beautiful. So my next question is, tell us about one of the best moments of your writing and publishing career.
Do you want to go
Candis
first so you don't have to go
Candis
last?
Shot me a look there.
I was like, no, because I think we should rotate going first because
Yes.
Yeah,
I think we should rotate where I'm always last so that I can come up with the answer at the last second here. Okay, so best moment. This is so easy for me to come up with because one of these moments just happened. So my new friend Trisha over there, she's a freshman, fantastic individual. We just met for coffee. My most favorite moments as a writer and what keeps me going is when I get to meet a reader. Oh, the kind of reader that I wrote the book for, right? Not just any reader, but somebody who was searching for the same answers as I was in anguish about an issue as I was, that caused me to write the book, which then caused somebody else who was struggling with the same things to pick up the book and read it. I mean, that's the greatest thing. There is no number of book sales, no number of literary awards that brings me the kind of satisfaction than meeting and connecting with a reader like Trisha, who conveys to me, your book really affected me, and it helped me think about things in a different way. That is all I need. I do not need to be in an article, be interviewed by anyone. That's all I need, and that's what keeps me going.
So should I go next? Okay. I have a funny feeling that a lot of us are going to come up with answers like that because those are my favorite moments too. I think in some ways one of the best moments that ever happened to me, it taught me a lot about what the writing life was going to be. Happened very early on. I think it must have been 2004 maybe. I had been invited to Canada to speak at a conference for the United Church of Canada, and it was their stewardship conference. And it was a big room. It's probably the biggest room of people that I had ever been in. And I had only published one book. It was called The Practicing Congregation. And so here I am feeling very fresh and new and all very excited about what had just happened. And these people were reading my book, and folks were coming up to me and telling me they liked it. Well, this one woman came up to me, and she was a pastor in Edmonton, Alberta. And she said, I want to tell you how much I loved your book. I loved it so much that I went out and I bought copies of your book for my entire congregation. And there I am sitting thinking to myself, oh, the New York Times bestseller list awaits. This is what's going to happen. Everybody's going to buy these books. And she must have seen that in my face. And she looked at me and she said, don't get too excited because my congregation has 14 people. And for me, that was the best moment because it taught me something that writers have to learn, and that is humility. There is an incredible graciousness of the world when 14 people in Edmonton, Alberta, pick up your book and take it seriously. And for me, that has become as precious as awards and other kinds of stuff that are far more public. And I will never forget her voice. I'll never forget the look on her face, and I'll never forget what she taught me, to always remember the 14 people in that church in Edmonton.
I'm going to give an answer for the students that are here. My first 4 books. Okay, the first books that I wrote them for free. You write for university presses, they do not pay you. But I have a friend who saw something in me that I did not see in myself. And she introduced me to her agent. And I learned that some people are paid to write. I was like 37 years old. It just was like a new revelation, right? That, you see books at like you see them at the Barnes and Noble or, and you wonder like, oh, how did they do that? And how did they get on the bestsellers list? They have an agent. And so there was just kind of this door that opened for a different kind of writing, a different kind of publishing. And, I was trying to, the way to explain it is, I don't know if you all play the lottery. I play the lottery. And you can't, the best thing about playing the lottery is that you have to buy the ticket. It costs $2. It usually costs $1. Okay. You buy the ticket, but you can't imagine what it would be like to win unless you play. Okay. So you buy your $2 ticket, and then you're like, what am I going to do with the money? And one day I realized, okay, I'm going to get a Maserati and I'm going to pay for my parents' home or whatever. And then there's something that at some point I was like, I bet if I won the lottery, one of these really big lotteries, there's an entire world that would open up to me that I didn't know existed because I don't have any money. But okay, why am I telling you this? Because meeting my friend seeing this potential in me and introducing me to her agent opened this door to a world that I just didn't know existed. And so I would say that was my best moment, insofar as it just opened a world of opportunity and potential that I didn't know that I had until that moment. Yeah.
I think on the heels of that story, I think there are a lot of the publishing journey has a lot of things that were really challenging for me and a lot of things that were really incredible and unanticipated for me. And the moment I'll talk about actually came on the heels of something unanticipated, which was I had graduated from Iowa and I'd gotten an agent before I left Iowa. And because you felt like you had to, and I felt like I was behind, and I wasn't, but I did. And so I got an agent, and I'd been working with her for 17 months, and I'd revised this revival season for her multiple times, and it just wasn't getting right. And one day I was teaching English, 9th grade English in this room, and I opened an email saying, okay, this is finally when she's going to accept this draft from me. And she's actually writing it to say, I'm sorry, I don't think we can work together anymore. And I read it before I started teaching. And it was the worst thing ever. And my students were, what's wrong with Miss West? And it's just, so let's not talk about my life. It's just falling apart. And we don't want to talk about it right now. So I had that moment. And for 6 weeks, when I was looking for a new agent, I thought, this book is never going to get published. No one's going to believe in it the way this woman did. I'm going to have to do, or someone's going to make me do a tremendous amount of work to get it published. And so I reevaluated my life for 6 weeks between Thanksgiving and Christmas of 2018. And then, because I just kind of don't give up, I was looking for agents, and I found another one. And so I found another agent in December of 2018, and she had me shorten the book, and then we went off on submission, which means when your book is done and you submit out to editors, and you submit all at once to a bunch of different houses and editors at the same time. And so we'd submitted widely, and she said, just wait. It was February 15th, and she said, just wait. Sometimes this will take a few months, and coming in with the doubt of having just lost an agent, I was like, this may not happen. Like, there's always these moments of this may not happen. I may not sell this book. This will, I have to reevaluate my entire life. And which is always just the running theme in my head. Why did I choose to be a novelist? And then I got a phone call about 5 days later before this meeting with at that point, my department chair. I had to talk about what I wanted to teach next year for English classes. Like, do you want 9th grade or 10th grade? And I got this email from my agent saying, we have interest. You have a phone call set up. But that doesn't mean anything because, you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you, and you could feel like she didn't like my thoughts about the book and I didn't like hers. And so I sit down, I talk to her on a Friday. Again, doubt. Well, I don't know if that went well. I liked her. She might not like me. I just lost an agent, all that stuff. And I went into a spin class, and I came out and my agent said, we have a deal. And so after the 17 months of working with this other person and finding a new agent and thinking that I was never going to sell this book or thinking I was never going to get agented again, I sold the book in 8 days. And so that was this huge, probably the biggest moment of the publishing journey was that this is actually going to be a thing. And so that was probably the biggest moment of my publishing journey.
Well, I can imagine coming out of spin class.
Yeah, coming out of spin class.
Like you're sweaty and exhausted,
exactly.
Yeah. But a nice metaphor for the work, gets you there, right? Yeah. You can spin and spin and spin, and then suddenly, my next question, actually, y'all sort of segued into it already, and it is the one of the challenges. I think this one of the challenges of your writing, and there are many, right, in the publishing world, many challenges. And in the writing world, but one of the challenges you've experienced in writing and publishing, and I think what you all have already said is that in writing and publishing, the sweet and the bitter go together. It's almost impossible to extricate them from each other. So could you elaborate a little on the challenges? And this is again for those who are here today. Can I have just a show of hand of all y'all who are writers, whether published or not? Yeah. So, and how about those of you who are thinking about writing? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, I think it's helpful for not only readers to hear, but for other writers and for aspiring writers to hear some of the tough things that they might encounter, as well as the wonderful things. So could you share, and who hasn't started yet?
Okay.
Candis, do you want to get going?
Well, first, I don't know why it took 17 months because revival season was really good. So, just saying.
I would say so. I usually write very technical books, like books that are. I run some numbers. I have thousands of respondents, and then I get code, and then it makes a regression and and I say what it says. But this book and the book that I'm working on now, I had to feel like I had to emotionally engage, right? And so when you're talking about police brutality, or you're talking about inequality, not in the this person this group makes this amount and this group makes that amount, but the kind of thinking through the lived experience, that is a different kind of work that I don't think I expected. And so I would say that challenges just kind of working through, like feeling my feelings while writing. So this one and the thing that I'm working on now has been very different and challenging in a way that just writing about data and stats was not challenging. Yeah.
This way?
I won't look.
I'm actually trying to think of what hasn't been challenging. My career as an author began with a challenge, and that is my very first job. I got my Ph.D. in religious studies here in 1991. I was the only person in my department who left the graduate program in religious studies and went right to a job. And so it literally seemed like I was on the fast track to being just a great academic. And that's what everybody was telling me. And so I get out to my first job, and it was the most miserable, brutal experience that I have ever had in my entire life. And I wound up getting fired after 4 years of conflict and tension, including having one of my department members hit me in the face. And I mean, it was just unbelievable how horrible it was. And I can't say much more of that because of the NDA. And so it was after that, I needed something else to do, because otherwise I was going to be a bag lady with a cart full of Karl Barth on the beach in Santa Barbara. And so I wound up writing for the Santa Barbara News Press. And the thing about someone seeing something in you didn't know you had is the editor of the Santa Barbara News Press was this amazing, old-fashioned, almost out of a Hollywood set kind of, editor. And he knew me through some stuff that had happened in Santa Barbara where I'd presented some public lectures. And he came to me, he said, "I think you would be a really great opinion writer." And I said, well, it's because my mother said I always had a lot of opinions. He taught me how to write an opinion piece. And I became, for 10 years, every single Sunday, you open the life section of the Santa Barbara News Press, and there was my face and 14 column inches of what I was saying in the world. And so the challenge immediately led to this other opportunity and something that opened up that I had literally never thought of as a pathway for myself. And it brought forth all kinds of creativity and passion, not only in writing, but also thinking myself in very entrepreneurial ways, which I had never been taught to think of. I was always very dependent on the idea of the academy taking care of me. And instead, I got this wonderful opportunity to craft a life outside of the academy. But the second piece of it, and I really want to be able to say this quickly, is that all of those events happened in the mid-90s. And so it's been since 1994 that I haven't had a traditional job, and that all of my work has been as a writer. And that means I have ridden every wave of the publishing industry in the last 30 years, which in itself represented challenges. Nearly every time I thought I had it down, there was some technological change. There was some change in taste. There was something that happened that made it all different all over again. So I had to learn constantly as I was going through this 30-year career. And I really want to encourage people that longevity is actually a challenge as an author. I just had my 64th birthday. And thank you for I appreciate that. I've been singing Beatles song all week, and so I just had my 64th birthday. And one thing that's really interesting is almost everyone I graduated from Duke with is now retired or retiring from their work. And I hear these stories, and I'm getting invited to these retirement parties, and I think to myself, what the heck? I'm just getting started.
Yeah, longevity and the changes in the publishing career.
So with that, just that encouragement. Longevity itself is a challenge, but longevity also brings more creativity.
Anjali?
So my book publishing career can best be described as the little engine that could. I started writing books in my 20s. My 2 books came out in the spring of 2021 at age 47. The Parted Earth is the 6th book I wrote. Southbound, my other book, is the 7th. None of those books that I wrote before got published. I have had 2 prestigious, well-known agents in the industry. One couldn't sell the book that they had contracted to represent. The other one ghosted me after I signed with him. I sold these 2 books to 2 wonderful small presses, unagented, after years and years and years of submitting and getting rejections. Literally 11 years of rejections, of near misses, of almost book contracts. And they finally I'll be 50 this year, and I'm basically just starting my book publishing career, despite the fact that I've been a writer since I was in my 20s. So just getting my foot in the door was so incredibly difficult for me. And I am trying to figure out what to do with my next book, because I basically have to start all over again. I still don't have an agent. These are small presses that only put out, 30 books a year, so they don't necessarily republish their own authors. So I'm kind of starting all over again. So I've just really had to learn to not measure my literary career against other people's who've had much easier roads than I have. I always told myself in my darkest moments as a writer, right, when I'm like on the 100th rejection letter for one of my books, if I get published, if I get a book out into the world, then that's the goal. Then I've achieved my wildest dreams. And I try to remember that at least it's out in the world, right? I mean, I used to want so much more as a writer, right? Like 1 million books out, bestseller, appear on various talk shows. But I have my book out in the world, and I've learned to actually be content and happy, and it's finding some readers, and this is my journey, and that's what I've tried to have perspective on, is that it's a really hard road for every writer. Some of us have it so much harder than others, and that's okay. You just got to keep at the writing, keep getting better at your craft, and find a publisher that's going to get your book out in the world.
Yeah. I think the miracle stories that people post on their websites as author stories of being sold with their first novel at auction are very rare and sometimes make believe. Yeah. Monica, we are fiction writers after.
I would probably say, and I alluded to this in one of my earlier responses, that probably the hardest thing about being a writer is, for me, perpetual doubt. And like paralyzing fear and doubt. And this idea that this isn't good enough, no one's gonna read it, who's gonna agent it, who's gonna publish it, who's gonna anything. And every day that you sit down to write, for me, doubt is always hanging out right there in my ear saying, what do you have to say that's different? Why are you so interesting? And the hardest thing for me is to kind of write around the doubt. And for a while, I sometimes would not write because the doubt is so strong. And then I think that the biggest lesson for me is to kind of write. Like, the doubt's not going to go away. Sometimes it gets a little quieter. Sometimes it whispers. But just write in spite of it. And so writing in spite of the doubt, in spite of the fear, in spite of what you worry that people are going to perceive about you or say about you or write about you online, is to write in spite of that. But the hardest thing for me has been real profound doubt.
Great advice. And thank you all for sharing. The hard stuff is as important to share as the inspirational, right? I want to have plenty of time for questions. But before we move to questions, briefly, if you will, could you share with us one woman that you would like to thank for supporting you on your journey? And Diana, do you want to get us started?
Well, it's the obvious one, but it's really my mother, who never was able to go to college and then winds up having a daughter who went on and got a Ph.D. Every single turn, my mother was there for me.
So I've been so lucky in the kind of love and support I've had on this journey. When it takes you so long to get a book out, you know who your true support is when they've been with you for years and you've cried on their shoulders about how difficult the journey is. So the woman, though, that rises to the top for me, her name is Valerie Boyd. She is the editor of Alice Walker's Journals that came out last year. She wrote the Zora Neale Hurston biography, Wrapped in Rainbows, and she recently published Bigger Than Bravery, which is an anthology. She was my writing mentor for years. Sadly, she passed away a little over a year ago. She headed the creative writing program at University of Georgia. I was nothing. I was nobody. I was just getting started in writing when I met her. And she had written this biography of Zora Neale Hurston that I loved. And I just couldn't even believe that at a literary event, she came and had a conversation with me. There were all these, authors, well-known authors at this event. And she took an interest in what I was writing. And I didn't even know who I was as a writer. So having a woman like Valerie see me as a writer when I didn't have any bylines and I didn't even know what I was doing, she's one of the reasons why I eventually pushed until I got a book contract. And so having someone like that in your corner can completely change your life as a writer.
Thank you. Monica, can you share?
Yeah, I'm going to echo Diana and say my mother as well. And the reasons for that are, as a child growing up, my mom I was not the most, highly talkative, highly inquisitive, highly curious, highly never shut my mouth kind of kid. And my mom answered every question I had and took me to the library every time I wanted to know something and helped me look stuff up and just encouraged that. And so when I started writing, she encouraged that too. And, to tell your parents that you want to be a writer is not something that some people might want to tell their parents. I was worried about saying that. My mom always said, well, give it a try. Why don't you give it a try? And so I'm really grateful that she encouraged that creativity in me and also encouraged my inquisitiveness and didn't shut down the questions. I think so much of my writing comes from questions that are just spinning in my head. And my mother, she was probably exhausted all the time, but she answered me all the time. And so I'm really grateful to her for that.
I cannot name one woman, and I won't because you didn't ask me to name more than one. And so I'll say this. I have this I'm an only child. And when you're an only child, your friends are your best friends. And I'm so I have a handful of friends, and they are the best. I would even say they were better than your friends, but I don't know y'all like that. But they are the best, and they all have really poured into me. They have all encouraged me. They have all read most of what I've written. And so I would be remiss to just name the one.
Thank you. This is, from giving these women who have given y'all permission, who have supported, who have recognized you and seen you and said, yes, your voices matter and are beautiful. And yeah, to be fair, the question I told them I was going to ask them was the women in your life, but we could be here for hours. So yeah, Candis was answering the question. I actually asked them ahead of time. So thank you. That's I'm touched and moved and inspired by all of you. I would love to open it up. We've got, I think, about 15 minutes or so for questions. So let us open it up. There are a couple people in the audience who have microphones. So let's start right up here in the front. Yeah. Why don't you use the microphone, because it'll be on the recording then.
I just wondered if you could each speak about your writing process, and both kind of the long-range process, but also your daily, what do you need around you? What do you what is the setting you need that sparks your creativity or your thinking process? That's big. That's a lot.
I'll go first. Mine is easy. It goes slowly.
Let me say, for the question and answer, y'all feel free, if you want to
Sure.
not answer a question or answer a question, feel free. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, slowly. Painfully. That's it.
I would say for me, I need noise. So something in the background that I'm not paying attention to. And I can filter it out, but I need something to kind of be running. And I write in a non-linear way. So right now I'm very close to sending out a second book, and it is to go back and revise this thing. It's like, why don't I write in a linear way? So I'm cutting and pasting and moving things in this draft so I don't delete anything, even if I know I'm not going to use it later. And then I go back and I put Frankenstein's, monster back together again and try to make a narrative. But I write in a non-linear way. I write when I can put everything. I write what I can when I can. So that means that if I skip 5 years and know I have to go back and fill that, I write the 5 years and then I go back later in the draft usually and write the other parts, which means that revising is hard. But that's my process. And then I try to write. I try to write every day when I can.
The nuts and bolts for me right now are tied up with the fact that I don't have a book contract right now. I'm so sorry to my agent. If he happens to be watching. I don't have a book contract right now, although I am working on a project. But instead, 2.5 years ago during the pandemic, I started writing a newsletter that is on the Substack platform. And I can say with some confidence that nothing else has changed my process more as a writer, and probably nothing else has been quite as powerfully successful and transformative as writing this newsletter in the last decade. So what that means is that I have given myself 2 deadlines per week. I send out a newsletter on Wednesday and I send out a newsletter on Sunday, and I have people on the other end who are waiting for those things. They respond to me very quickly because you can do that on that platform. So I have this high level of reader-writer engagement, and I know that I have to be there for those people. And so that's been a really interesting change. I haven't written with that quick of a response ever before, and I kind of like it. It's both a little bit intimidating, and yet it's more rewarding than the length that happens with books. So that's kind of where I am right now. And the other piece is that I work around structure. So every book is a little different depending on what the structure of the book is. And the process for me of writing a book emerges out of structure, which is, I don't know if everybody works that way. It just is what works for me.
I was interested, Monica, in you saying that you write non-linearly. Could you explain that because there's the structure that then we fill in the pieces as we've designed it.
And the opposite of that, which is what I do.
Okay, so could you explain for us all what it means to write non-linear?
Yeah. So if you think of a story, I think the idea of structure, I would love to write a book that in my head I can write from start to finish, or that I know what start and finish are. I have to write it to know what I'm saying, and I don't often know what I'm saying until I write it down. Mm-hmm. And so then I write it down. It's like, oh, that's what I wanted to say. And then I realize something else I want to say, and I write that down. And the structure comes from that, and I don't fit it into a structure that I've already put in place. And so what that means is that I write I have a draft that's full of things that are little snippets that will come at the end, or things that'll come at the beginning, or things that'll come in the middle, that are all kind of mushed together because it's what I can write then. And then when I know what I'm trying to say, then I realize, oh, this is the structure this should take. But I don't know in advance what that structure looks like, and I really envy that you have that. I don't have that.
I can't put a word on the page until I have a structure. And they're all different, because sometimes you dive in the middle of the structure and write out.
Yeah.
But I always have to have that architecture, at least. And this might be a difference between fiction and nonfiction.
Maybe,
as well.
yeah. I build a house as I'm standing in it. Maybe I need a wall there, and then I put a wall there, yeah.
Anjali, how about you?
So it's changed so much for me, my process over the years. I used to be one of those writers where, because most of the time I wasn't writing with a contract. It used to be like 300 words a day or X a number of words a week. But I think as I've gotten older, I've sort of lived life a little more and realized that some of these sort of self-imposed deadlines were actually affecting my mental health and putting pressure on myself in ways that were not good for me. So I try to do big picture deadlines where I'll say, by the end of 2023, I want to have my first draft of my next novel. And how I get to that deadline is up to me. Maybe it's going away for a weekend and staying at an Airbnb and knocking out 10,000 words that weekend. But I try to be more flexible. I think part of that comes from the fact that I'm chronically ill, so I can't really be available to do, creative writing at certain times and certain days, because I'll have a flare-up when I have this whole plan to get a certain number of chapters down. So I've learned to be really gracious with myself and put my mental health first and make the deadlines a little softer and a little more abstract. And I find that taking that pressure off of myself actually helps me get more work done.
I'm hearing this theme of change and learning and relearning and change again throughout both the creative and the professional life, right? And interwoven certainly for writers. And I was talking earlier at plenary session about how the idea that we start a career and remain on that path doing that, those 5 things for the rest of our life is really uncommon, right? And how this is a learning and changing at each moment, and your stories are revealing that. Yeah, thank you. Questions? Over here? Right here. Oh, sorry, I didn't see. Right there with the, yeah. I'm sorry.
You're fine. Hi. So I guess my question would be, one of the biggest things that I struggle with as a writer is I have an idea and then I'm like, okay, cool, I'm going to start writing. And then I'm like, wait a minute, I need to know every single detail of every single character, of every single world building, the environment, the geography. I need to do da-da-da-da-da before I actually start writing. So, and then as you can imagine, nothing gets written. How do you cut off the research brain or the world building brain, or how do you navigate how much you need to know before you start writing to, you build as you go and then you just start writing?
Would our fiction writers like to respond to that?
Yeah,
first?
I mean, so my novel takes place over 75 years. It's historical fiction, and it's about the partition of the Indian subcontinent when the British quit India, and then there was the birth of India and Pakistan. I tell you, I was so haunted by a survivor, because there are still some survivors from that event in 1947, reading my book and me getting any little detail wrong. So I would find myself in these very obsessive research modes where I'm reading all kinds of archival research to figure out if I'm going to get this right. So at the end of the day, I think what you have to realize is that you're still telling a story, number one. Number two is, if you're writing about something that's historical, people's memories contradict one another. So I needed to realize that even though I wanted to tell the most truthful story I could that was accurate historically, there will actually be several different versions of some event. So you're not 100% going to be able to get it right anyways. And I think, too, even if you're writing, say, a futuristic novel, right, and you get so caught up in the world building, I started finding it easy for myself to just say, first, get down the story and work on the characters, and then go back and layer in the world, the setting, the history, the facts that you pull up from the archives. Because what you might find, as I did early on in the process of my novel, is that I ended up revising and rewriting so many sections of my novel that that 1,000 hours I spent researching this one riot that took place in Delhi in 1947 didn't even make an appearance in the novel. And I spent all that time researching it. It was interesting to learn about, but didn't end up showing up in the novel. So push through to get to the story. Finish the draft. Would try to honestly finish the first draft, without doing hardly any research except for what you have to do to develop the characters and to push the story forward. Then go back and layer it in as you need it.
Oh, that's brilliant advice. Wonderful. Monica, how about you?
Yeah, I totally agree with all that advice. I would also maybe add that if you are a person who is a structured daily writer, if that's a thing that you enjoy, so if you sit down and you enjoy the research and enjoy the world building, give yourself time to do that, but then give yourself make sure that give yourself half an hour to do that, and say, okay, this is and set a timer and hold yourself accountable to that, and you can do that world building and that structure and that stuff in that 30 minutes, and then push yourself for the rest of that time to say, no, I'm going to actually write down the bones, and then figure out, and you can just give yourself that structure if that works for you. You can still get some of that research in, but it keeps you from being in that spiral of, I'm doing so much deep diving that I'm actually not writing it. So, and then just like Anjali said, put in a draft, more to come, and as you figure out what this character is, and it frees you up to then do both things.
That was a great question. I'm thinking about what, Candis, you said, slowly, painfully. Writing is hard, right? I mean, it's hard, and sometimes the world building and the research, too, can be super fun, right? So it's sort of giving you, that's terrific, wonderful advice, y'all. We have time for one more question over there in the red, and right there would be great.
I was just wondering how you decide what to write about. You have all these different things that you may be interested in. How do you choose what you're going to write your book about?
Great question. Who would like to start?
I'll start. It's going to sound, for the writers, this might make sense. I see pictures in my brain at all times. And so I see a picture, and then I have to tell myself the story of this picture. And oftentimes, as I'm writing through the picture, the story itself comes to me, which may not surprise you, given the fact that I do not write a structured linear book. It's like, where am I? And so the picture then tells me what the book is going to be. And the more I'm digging into that, the more I can see what the book itself will be. I have no idea before I start writing what I'm going to write about. I don't say, I want to write a book about politics or something. I had no idea I was going to write a book about religion. But the book about religion is the book that I saw in those pictures, and that's the book that came to me. So that's what my process is like. It's almost, I just receive pictures are in my head. I write through them. I tell the story of them, and then a new picture comes in my head, and I write that story.
I write about whatever contradiction I kind of see that just intrigues me. So, I have a book about white millennials' racial attitudes, and that is a group of walking contradictions. And so it's like, what is up with this group? Why, what's their deal? And so then I get to, so that's why, that's how I do that. Or the book I'm working on now is about why we have to keep seeing cell phone videos of really horrific things to get ourselves wanting to make change. That really intrigues me. Why do we have to do that? So I often pick things that I can't get over, that I can't understand. And similar way what Anjali was saying is it's something I just want to have a better understanding of. And then I just, go until I can't go anymore.
Sometimes a phrase or a news story or simply something that sort of enters my consciousness will sort of send me off, asking questions or thinking about an issue, and then I realize I have a story to tell about whatever that thing is. And I also think it's helpful to know that I've probably written, 50 or 60 books in my mind that never made it to paper. And I just threw one away, that I was writing a book about fundamentalism. And I finally just looked at the darn thing and said, I can't spend another 5 years of my life talking about fundamentalists and writing about fundamentalists. I will lose my mind. And so something else that was sort of in the background came forward, and now I'm working on a project that I'm really excited about. And it was the whole project spun out of a sentence that was suggested to me by a liberal Baptist pastor in Richmond, Virginia.
I love that, Diana. So for me, what ends up getting me to commit to a story, whether it's nonfiction or fiction, is either a person or a character. So when I was writing this novel, I could not get out of my mind a grandmother and a granddaughter that had been estranged over time. Couldn't stop thinking about them. So even as other stories were coming to me, it was these two totally fictional people that just haunted me. I dreamed about them. I thought about what they might be doing, or where they were from, what they looked like. Couldn't stop thinking about them. When I write nonfiction, if I'm doing a story, and I'm trying to figure out, I want to write something about immigration, let's say, and I will talk to people and interview a few people and not really see the story and not really know I'm going to commit to it until I meet a specific person that I interview. And I'm like, that's the person that is going to keep me going on this story. And that's why now everything is is coming together, is because of that person. So I have to almost build a relationship with either a character or a person before I can commit to actually writing that story.
Wow, that was a great question. So many different foci and moments and inspirations. Thank you, all of you, for sharing. This is fantastic. So wonderful.